Hey, this is a clip from Quincy Carrier live on the OBR, where I stream Mondays at 7 p.m. I had my friend Jacob Roach on. We had an interesting conversation about the Cleveland Browns here, so check it out. Stage, how you doing? How you guys doing today?
Wow, I'm just admiring that mustache. I'm doing good.
It
How's
gets
things going?
better every week, right? It gets better every week. It's a strong stash. I'm Team Jacob Stash on here. But there's been a lot of talk about the Browns' upcoming offseason and what they need to do. I don't feel like a ton of it's been super productive in this space. I feel like a lot of it is just like, oh, we need to fire this guy, fire that guy, and then blame every problem on some individual moves that you can make here or there. What my goal is to have a more productive conversation about what realistically can be solved in free agency and where the Browns could spend the resources and how much resources they're going to have. First question I have for both of you guys to kind of consider is, we know the reports are that Kevin's safe, that Andrew Berry's not going anywhere. Uh, but are there any other coaching moves underneath those guys that you feel like the team should consider, or similar to how the Browns lost Bill Callahan next year, are there guys that could just be leaving the organization for other reasons, right? I've heard Tommy Reese be kind of brought up for was it a head coaching job over at North Carolina, right? If Bill didn't get the job.
Yep.
So you have to imagine there's going to be some more smoke around him as well.
I don't specifically want to fire anyone. I'll leave that up to Kevin Stefanski. I don't have enough information. For example, I know a lot of people cannot stand the offensive line, Andy Dickerson, and I feel bad for the guy who walked in and they're just like, "Hey, you're going to take over the offensive line, and by the way, your 3 offensive tackles are out. Figure it out."
Yeah.
So I don't have a real issue with them retaining the staff as is. I don't have an issue with Bubba Ventrone or any of these guys. I like Ken Dorsey. I think he's done a nice job under the circumstances. Um, Tommy Reese certainly could end up going to a college. I'd be very curious to see how choosy he is on that, because, I don't, unless you get the right circumstances, I don't know how eager anyone is to go back to college. It is a really difficult job to work in the college landscape. The other guys that I would sort of a little bit worried about on that front, the other one that jumps out is Ephraim Banda, the safeties coach.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy who's drawn a lot of praise. I think he's done a really nice job with the Brown safeties. Ronnie Hickman, D'Anthony Bell, like he's been able to get guys in the lineup at different points and get positive plays. So I'm more than happy if Kevin Stefanski deems it that way to roll into the next year with the same group. The only thing I'd be curious about is is there going to be an opportunity at some point where it's like what happened with Ventrone in the first place, where we get through January and suddenly the Colts implode. Bubba Ventrone's out there and Kevin Stefanski's yeah, Mike, you said, how I said I wasn't going to fire you. Get out. I'm going to go hire this guy. So maybe there's an opportunity where Kevin Stefanski, who is extremely competitive, sees a way to get better. But overall, I wouldn't expect a ton of movement.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Jacob? What do you feel? Do you feel like there's any moves that they should consider? Real quick, Jacob, I don't think your audio is coming through your mic. I'll go real quick. I don't know specifically, because like it changes every team what the special teams coach does, right? I'll say I've been pretty unsatisfied with what's going on with like special teams, especially like with coverage at times. Like the return stuff, I don't know how much of that is just like the guys that they have back there, or maybe they're handcuffed because of how they structure these rosters. But the return stuff has been what bugs me the most. Is like, if I see another returner catch a ball within the 5-yard line, I'm gonna lose my mind. Like, because like, I think it's happened with so many different coaches, because even before him, Mike Prefer used to drive me crazy with Donovan Peoples-Jones. Like, he would make circus catches in the 5-yard line. I'm like, what are we doing here? So I would consider, me personally, maybe special teams coach. I can understand if they're like, hey, if nobody that they love is out there, then they're not going to make the move. It's going to be kind of a tough one for them. But Jacob, what do you feel?
Yeah, I was gonna say I do also feel bad for Andy Dickerson because like he had his top 3 tackles off and he was following up Bill Callahan and everybody like Callahan's great, but like I think we put him on another level even than what he is, like just because of because he did some awesome things like when Kevin first got there. So I do feel bad for him. The one thing that I think of, and Casey Kinnaman's talked about it a bunch, and I've kind of gone back and forth with him, is if you're trying to lean into everything that Stefanski did when he first got here, and I know not things aren't changed nearly as much as people tried to think they are.
Don't you do
In
it.
terms of like, it's very marginal. But my thing is, if you try to lean back into it, and maybe Clint Kubiak becomes available, if Clint Kubiak's there, potentially to come in and be the offensive coordinator and kind of build off of what Kevin used to do, the Kubiak stuff. Plus, he had all that time with Shanahan to kind of evolve. And like, I'll just say that misdirection stuff that he did to our defense in New Orleans this year was there was a lot of not knowing what the heck was going on the field from our guys there in that situation, but that's a whole nother story. But that's the one that I would look at is if Kubiak or someone of that nature came available to kind of go back to some of the other stuff a little bit more. Again, I'm not saying it's a totally different offense because in reality it's not. It is a lot of the same concepts, but if you're going to go back to more under center stuff and things of that nature, I do think maybe that change. But even there, I don't know. I'm not like a blow. I understand the blow it up side of things, but like I'm not really sure how big of a difference some of these position coaches would actually make if you make those moves.
Yeah, I think the question on offense when it comes to coordinator is more or less, what does Kevin want to do there? Right? Like, does he like collaborating with Ken Dorsey and having that influence in the offense? Or does he feel like him having a bit of a degree of separation from the offense is something that isn't good for it long term or short term? That I think that's really the determination of like going after Clint Kubiak. I feel like that's another one where there would be a degree of separation there, right, in order to get him, because he's a pretty well sought after name at this point. But there's more of a kind of there's more overlap in that Venn diagram with what Kubiak likes to do, and obviously Kevin, given that they come from, Kubiak literally comes from the Kubiak tree. But
more way than one.
Kevin is in that tree as well. So I think there could be something to that. Maybe this was before he got an opportunity too, right? What are the top needs for this team for you guys?
Well, for me, look, I mean, quarterback is good trump everything in terms of needs, but to me, it's the line of scrimmage, and specifically offensive line. The Browns have a good amount of talent on defensive line. I'm greedy. I would like more of it, but just I think the Browns could fix so much if they can just even block at an average level consistently, run blocking up front. There's so much we can criticize in terms of like Jameis Winston has a nightmare performance. And we go back and we sit there and look the Broncos game, and like in 2 games he threw 100 passes. You have to when you can never run the ball, and ultimately you're going to end up with a flawed quarterback this offseason, one way or another. So the best way to eliminate some of these flaws and to reduce overall risk of turnovers and all these other things is to be able to run the football, to be able to stay on schedule, to be able to control the clock, to be able to hopefully play with the lead more often, control the scoreboard a little bit more often, so that you don't have to do these things where, like he threw 58 times against the Broncos and he had to. I don't want Joe Burrow throwing 58 passes if I'm the Browns. Like I don't want any quarterback to be in that situation, because if you're playing that way, it's inherently risk. You're just naturally risky. So I want to see the Browns be able to get more balanced. I want to see them put defenses in situations where Jermaine Ifedi is not lining up in the backfield because he knows what's coming. He knows the nightmare is coming, and he cannot block Charles Omenihu. Because at least Omenihu has to respect the possibility that the Browns are going to be able to run the ball and run the ball effectively. Because like the game Sunday, 2 defenses who said, I don't care that you're going to run the ball. go ahead and get a 10-yard run here or there. What I don't want to have happen is you beat me in the passing game. And the Browns need to establish credibility on that side of the ball to force teams to be able to respect them in a way that I think you can see what the Minnesota Vikings have been able to do, what the Pittsburgh Steelers have been able to do, and what the Browns were able to do earlier in Kevin Stefanski's tenure when you got to the fourth quarter with a lead and you could shut the door. You could end it. You had Nick Chubb as your Mariano Rivera and you're just like, game's over. Yeah. And you just watching yesterday. You watched the Pittsburgh Steelers gave the ball to the Eagles with 10:43 left in the fourth quarter, down 2 scores. They never got the ball back. Like, I want to have that ability. And even last year with Joe Flacco, the Jets game, the Browns blew the Jets out and could not run clock in the second half. It was just ridiculous. You had to keep throwing. So that to me is the biggest priority for them, to really make a big gain that doesn't necessarily involve just going, we got to get a better quarterback.
Yeah, I think the line of scrimmage is definitely an area. My question with the line of scrimmage, especially when we're talking about on the offensive side, where do you find these areas to kind of immediately upgrade if you're the Browns? Because we don't know what his future is going to be with the team, if he's going to stay or not. If Joe doesn't retire, you can't just like bench him, right? Like, he's too much of a staple to do so. And he's still capable of playing well. He played well this last week versus Kansas City. Yeah. Same thing kind of goes with Wyatt, where Wyatt will give you some good games. Like, he's a little bit inconsistent. And then at center, you have Posick, who you did kind of make a little bit of a commitment to, but that's a commitment you can get out of if you really wanted to. So like, when I look at the line, I'm like, okay, there's an opportunity at tackle. There's an opportunity at center. And then when you get to the guards, you would like to be able to be a bit more consistent and physical in the run game than you are right now. But is there that opportunity to make that immediate upgrade this offseason, given the context of the players that are there right now?
Well, one thing I want to say, and I see the comment come up a couple of times about Zach Zenner, is like, if that is a situation where Joel does potentially retire and you think that Zenner can play left or something of that nature, I just wanted to say that I do think Zenner is a lot better football player than what you saw on the field this year when he was thrown out there. And you give him a full offseason, not recovering from a broken leg. That dude can run block. Like, that is a run blocking guard. That is what you drafted him to do. That is what he did at Michigan, was he did manhandle people. I mean, Pete, I think you've talked about this maybe a little bit. I don't know that he's ever snapped, but I mean, you can probably try it. I don't know. Do you know anything about that?
He has never snapped in a real game, but he has snapped in the spring game for Michigan. So he's at least functionally done it. I don't know if that's something they necessarily want to explore, but it's one of those things you get in a situation, the more you can do, certainly going to help you. I would also argue that, one, the broken leg is something that it's going to take a minute to get that functional strength back and to be a power player. He's got to develop his body. He's a really savvy pass protector. He understands the job. He also is a perfect scheme fit for what the Browns want to do. If you watch Michigan's offensive line, all they did was double team and pull. And that's what the Browns want to do. And that's why one of the reasons I think Wyatt Teller is a good fit for this scheme, even though I would like to see him play better. I think Jack Conklin is a really good fit for this scheme. Joel Bitonio can play in any scheme. And if Joel Bitonio says he's going to come back and play next year, he's playing. Like, that's it. I mean, and if he wants to give 1% of his contract out to cash for me to advocate for this position, I will happily continue to do that. But like, I think the honest conversation you have to have with Joel Bitonio is how much of this is injury. He's been playing through a lot. He played through a bad back yesterday and had dominated in pass protection. I still am confused at how the Browns were really good in pass protection yesterday overall after the seasons they've had. And then how much of this is just a function of age. Is he just getting older? I'm more inclined to go with the latter, but I don't know that you're ever going to get all pro Joel back. So he's got to decide. But either way, if he decides to retire, I'm in the free agent market at guard. If he decides to stay, I'm going to keep drafting behind and keep getting more guys. I went to last year saying that you needed to draft a guard And then in 2025, the year we're in now, you need to draft another guard. Like there was always a 2-step process of getting guys that were going to be able to do it. Ethan Posick, you can release him after the season, save $6 million. I think the Browns are going to address that in free agency. I don't love the center class in the draft. I don't love trying to get a rookie center to step in and play immediately either. I want a guy who's been in the league for a minute. I want a guy who sort of understands what you need to do. I would love to find another JT Treader situation where you can have a guy plug in and be great. Now,
how do they feel about Whippler?
I loved Whippler as a prospect, but the issue you run into is he was a backup who the team liked. They liked what they saw from him. They the concern coming out of it wasn't effort. It wasn't technique. You watch him on tape at Ohio State and you're just like, man, he gets it. It's just physically getting strong enough, particularly in his core. But then you surgically repaired ankle as a backup, and you've got to make these decisions by March and April. You're with no reps at that point. You can't then say Luke Whippler is going to be your starter. So I certainly want him in the mix. I want him to be back healthy and trying to compete for a job, but I can't hand him anything, which is why I've ultimately got to address it in free agency. It's the same thing with DeJuan Jones and his surgically repaired broken ankle. I think he's a starting tackle, but can he, there's so many weird dynamics with him being as big as he is. How awkward is that healing process going to be? How much of his offseason is he going to lose to just getting healthy again? Is he going to be able to, really work to get better? In general, I'm always more concerned about guard than I am tackle for the reasons you mentioned, which is run blocking. I want to win at the point of attack.
Yeah.
Now, ultimately, if you can get a franchise player, you're always going to take the tackle. But if you're telling me I want to get above average play, I need it to be a guard. And part of that is because quarterbacks, and Jameis Winston is guilty of this, hates pressure up the middle. He cannot function with pressure up the middle. He just looks down and waits to die. So that's the other part. And I think that becomes a bigger priority, and why I think getting that guard and center group correct is going to be a big part. I don't love this draft class on the offensive line, but I do think there are a lot of quality options, which is why I think you can go to that area. And depending how you feel about the recovery of Jones, and hopefully Conklin gets through this rest of this year healthy, that you can sign I thought Hakeem Adeniji was going to be in this group, but a way that people can sort of contextualize it would be, I would like to see them get a Chris Hubbard, Kendall Lamb caliber.
Core four is open. This is going to be available this offseason, right?
Yeah, like that. You got to get somebody else, that
Pat
probably
McCarry.
$5 million range to feel good about that position, where you got 3 guys that you feel good about, where you're not doing Jed Wills, or you're paying $15 million for what should be your swing tackle.
Do you think Dan Moore is going to get starter money in free agency? Because I know he's hitting the class this year too. Because it feels like a hard sell, right?
North. Nobody in the AFC North get paid.
No,
he's never blocked Myles Garrett.
Well, I mean, like having to block Myles Garrett is a tough sell, right, for him. But he's been solid enough, I guess, at left tackle that somebody could justify being like, hey, we could just push him in if we need a starter real quick. You'd be fine with Dan Moore. Think in that context. If you're putting Dan Moore out there like this is our left tackle of the future, yeah, you're in trouble. But
it's just gonna be tough. Because I worry about, like, even if you look at the draft, you're sitting there going, man, I love Will Campbell, or I love the dude from Texas,
Kelvin Banks.
I don't know that you can guarantee either of them as a tackle.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, and we're going to find out real quick in March what teams really think, because I think sticker shock is going to be real on some of these free agents at tackle, because I think if teams are freaked out about this situation, they are going to overpay to get guys to feel good about that spot and not going to the draft with it.
Yeah, and I think the signs there, my bad, Jacob, I'll let you get in. I think the signs there, because Garrett Bowles just got extended 82 over, 3? He's 32 at this point. Yeah. So it's like, I feel like they're trying to get ahead of the market right there, just kind of telling you where they're at. But what's up, Jacob?
The NFL has an offensive line problem. We've said it in the offseason, we've seen it all across, because people were harping on the Browns to why didn't you go get another tackle? Why didn't you get another offensive one? It's because nobody was giving you any. Like, you weren't signing them, you weren't trading for them. Anybody that had one, they sure as heck weren't going to get rid of it. And to Pete's point, I think Kelvin Banks is a tackle, but a lot of people I talk to don't. Like, I mean, I've talked to several draft people that I really respect that say that he's not there, and that is kind of the consensus on a lot of this class, is that a lot of these tackles are going to move into guard, or they're guys that have already played guard. So like it's a really tricky kind of position to try to navigate right here. And right now you're picking 7th. Going into that draft and just being and not having any kind of starting option at like left tackle and hoping that Kelvin Banks, like, because to me, he's one of the like guys that at least his ceiling is top 10 level. But like, it's kind of, I was listening to Todd McShay and they were talking about, we don't have any offensive linemen in the top like 12 in the entire class. So like that's, so now is someone going to trade up and jump the Browns to get a tackle, you know, that sort of thing, just because maybe they have one in their top 12 and it's one of these guys, and everybody else says, oh no, wait until day 2 or whatever. It's just really risky. But there's not a very, very good ones out there. So you just kind of, to Pete's point, I think finding a way to get average is going to be as run blocking. Like, you don't have to go out and break the bank and find the new Joe Thomas. You just have got to get more physical up front in the run game and just get up higher than where you are.
All right. So we've kind of talked about, we brought up the quarterbacks obviously is going to be a big thing that they're going to have to figure out within the next few years. We're going to talk about, we already talked about the line of scrimmage. Is there any other area of this team where you look at and you go, they probably should address this offseason?
I think tight end depth, especially, I don't know if you want to try, maybe this is how convenient, this is an amazing tight end draft for them to be there. So I think that's like tight end depth, running back a little bit, but both of those positions are loaded in the draft this year. I think you'd absolutely need to draft a tight end and a running back in my mind. You don't have to go super crazy about it by any stretch of the imagination. And I thought Akins has played better this year than he did last year, like significantly better. But so he got one more year on his deal, doesn't he? I believe. I think he said, he's a 3.
No, this is it.
Oh, is it? It was just the 2. So right now you've got David Njoku, you know, on the roster. So like, I would like a little bit better depth there. I love Njoku, but like, I think that there's something should be done in that room.
What you
I look at both of those as positions of opportunity. Now, I think running back is a bigger need between the two, but like I watched, Ken Dorsey run 2 tight ends in Buffalo without issue with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. Like, there's no problem with that. So if you get a guy you really like, great. Like, if you want to, and you can, work with different styles. I would have no problem re-signing Jordan Akins based on what I've seen. I don't feel like paying him a whole lot to do it, but I'd have no problem rolling with that if they want to do that. But if they want to have more options, I know Kevin Stefanski loves sort of the accordion effect where he can play small, big, whatever, and cause problems that way. Great. I think there's a lot of tight ends that could do that. Does he want another true wide? Does he want more of a flex type guy? Those are interesting questions. And running backs just smart at this point. I don't think it's a huge priority, and that's because I think the class is so good. I think there are going to be multiple guys who are potential Pro Bowl, really high level players that are picked day 3, and that's more where I'm at in terms of focus. Now, if the value's too great, if Ashton Genty wants to hang out in the second round, fine, we can have that conversation. But overall, I'm just more interested in addressing line of scrimmage and then adding to it. I want to win up front and then get backs behind it. I don't want to do sort of what the Giants did and go, hey, Saquon, fix our running game, and then not adequately address the other parts to it. And then he goes to a team that did the exact same thing I'm advocating for in the Eagles, and now he's great. So I think that's the better plan of attack. Get the line of scrimmage right, and then get to running back. But I do think running back's really interesting. And if you are somebody who's in the mold of, well, the Browns should just keep getting more weapons that can catch the ball. There are a lot of interesting players in that vein in this class too, because more collegiate teams are asking running backs to do more in the passing game that make them really interesting. Or you get an interesting guy. I'll just throw out one name, Blanchard Smith or whatever his name is from SMU, who's going to be in the playoff.
Oh, yeah.
He is, if you like Tyrone Tracy last year, who was a wide receiver who converted to running back, Smith was a wide receiver at Miami who they used as a gadget player. He transfers to SMU. They just put him in the backfield and they just hand him the ball, and he's got the same type of speed, and they'll throw it to him too because he's got wide receiver ability. But if you're just looking for that weapon type, I think Savion Williams, who I'm not as enamored with as some from TCU, is also in that mold of just line him up and give him the football. Those type of players that aren't necessarily the wide receiver or whatever that can just complement your passing game.
All right. So we've talked about kind of where we feel like the needs are for the Browns. This offseason, there's only but the players that are available. What positions do you feel like you can actually like sufficiently address because of the quality of talent that's going to be available both in free agency and in the draft? And if you have some priority names that you're like, hey, try to find a way to get this guy on your team, whether it be through the draft or free agency, who would those guys be?
Well, center is one I think you can knock out in free agency. Josh Myers is a guy that stands out to me, and incidentally also from Green Bay, which is where they got J.C. Treader the last time. Ohio State guy. There's all those connections, former second-round pick. I don't know if the Packers are going to pay him. If the Browns want to cut Ethan Posick, Myers is going to be 26. That could be a good fit. I know, if you look at his PFF, it's not spectacular, but I think he's a pretty good player. That would be a name that sort of jumps out to me in that area. But I think that's one you can address in free agency. I think you can address the depth at that position in free agency. That becomes where I think would be a very big stabilizing factor. So much of that is going to depend on how good they feel about Myers as sort of a guy who can run the line of scrimmage. This is an area where I don't love Ethan Posick. I don't think he's one of the criticisms I have with Posick, and I saw this yesterday, even though I thought he blocked his ass off relative to other games, is there are times where you just see free rushers coming off, and it feels like this should be something that should be picked up, and they aren't. Mm-hmm. And he's the guy in charge of that. Treader was awesome. Nick Harris was good at that stuff. I'm curious to see if Josh Myers fits that bill.
What about you, Jacob?
I think there's a lot of opportunity, and Pete talked about being greedy. There's a lot of opportunity on the defensive line in the draft. Like if you are looking defensive tackle, edge, either one, I think there's a ton there. Listen, I've said it for a little while. If Mason Graham is just there, if you're like, hey, here's Mason Graham here at pick 7, are you kidding? Like the idea of Mason Graham and Michael Hall next to each other for the next 4, 5, 6 years, like, because I think Michael Hall's played really well. There's some knocks on some of the run defense stuff as he was coming out. Well, Mason Graham does everything. Like this dude absorbs it. The thing about it is if Mason Graham's absorbing double teams in the run game next to Michael Hall, and you've got that freaky athleticism and they don't have the ball, I'm just putting all of that stuff together because Graham's a great athlete. He's a relentless rusher, but his power, I just think that is a guy that I've seen mocks have him fall to the Browns often. I've done it. I've done several mocks with him, but if I could find a way for him or Abdul Carter, because Abdul Carter opposite Myles Garrett is the Penn State pass rusher. I know you're talking about like filling some holes in like running back. There's opportunities there in tight end and stuff and getting better at the line of scrimmage. But if you can I think there's some really good opportunities to make a strength even better on the defensive line when you get to the draft portion of the offseason.
Yeah, I think with like the first round pick, if I'm the Browns, just get a dude. Like it will not just get a dude. It's not easy to just get a dude. But if a dude is there, I see no reason for you to feel the need to be like, no, we need to go ahead and draft the guard right here. If you're not like in love with that guard. Now, if you think one of these guards / tackle prospects are that, right? Like if you're one of these, like one of them that really loves Will Campbell, for example, like that's one of them where some people have him as a draft crush, and you take him, right? Like it makes sense if you think he's a dude and like he's there and it's fits a need, yeah, go ahead, do it there. But if you feel like you have to kind of, because I think part of the issue with the tackle class this year is the guys that were pretty sure could play tackle, right? Like Cam Williams is one out of Texas, the right tackle, and then Josh Simmons, who just had the ACL injury, right, out of Ohio State.
Yeah.
Those are probably the two, but like they're not the better offensive line prospects, and you don't want to put yourself in a position where you feel like you're kind of compromising just to fill a need. You know, especially if you feel like there's somebody who could be a game changer available, because you know that's always going to be a priority. You want to just get as many good players as possible. Pete brings up Philadelphia's draft strategy where they do some of that, but also they just have priority. I'm like, hey, Nolan Smith is there. Like, let's get a guy who could jump over a running back in the backfield, like just for the hell of it, right? Or you know, let's go get both Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean in the same draft, right? Like, you know, we're gonna take the good talent that is there. I think that's part of what the Browns should want to do here. Any other positions you feel like this class of free agents in like we talked about the running back class, that there's going to be a lot of solutions there if you want to upgrade or get some running backs in the draft. Are there any other areas where you look at this class and you're like, okay, the Browns have these needs, but this is what this class offers, and this is where we overlap?
I mean, edge. I mean, the edge class, and part of the reason I love the Mason Graham idea, and we'll see what athletic testing produces, is because the edge class is so deep. Like, you're not going to get me to say no to Abdul Carter because he looks like Micah Parsons out there. But when you look at the depth and the production, it goes forever. And, you know, Donovan Izaraku from Boston College is the most productive kid in the country and doesn't get much talk. He led the team basically in every category. I think he's second on the team in solo tackles, but he's, you know, we'll be curious to see what his length is and stuff like that. Landon Jackson is what looks to me like a Jim Schwartz style defensive lineman. And he's 6'6", 290, and can theoretically move around on the defensive line. Mike Green from Marshall is going to be an interesting conversation all offseason because very little of what he does looks orthodox in terms of how he rushes the passer, but he's also the most dominant rusher in the country. Like, flat out undeniable. Now, when you get into athletic testing, and particularly things like the 3-cone, there is a special number, if you can get below 6.9, where it sort of it unlocks the ability to hit those upper echelon all-pro areas. So if you can combine, if Abdul Carter can hit that number and stuff, it may be too tempting to take him. But if some of these other guys can match it, whether it's Green or Ezraku or a number of other guys, then all of a sudden you sit there and go, I feel great taking Mason Graham, who I think is a phenomenal scheme fit. He's upfield guy. He can play the 3 or the 1, depending on the situation, complements a lot of things, and just makes plays that you can feel good that you're going to be able to come away with an edge rusher that feels good for you. Like James Pierce is another one where it's like, I think most people think he's going to be in the top 15, but there's a few outliers that are sort of like not sure. Nick Scorton, he's 20. He's 6'5", 6'4", 290. He runs like a gazelle, and there's all kinds of things you can criticize and say he doesn't do this very well. Power, for example, I don't think he demonstrates a whole lot of power, but he's 20. And you look at him and you go, he's got not quite Myles Garrett body, but Myles Garrett type ability. He's an Aggie. And you sit there and you go, I can talk myself into this, especially if the Browns were to do something like win their next 3 games or something like that. And you're suddenly out of the category, or you sit there and go to whether it's an offensive tackle or a quarterback or somebody wants to trade up and you want to move back and get additional assets, and you find yourself in that spot. Like, they're really intriguing options as well. Now, ultimately, I'd rather get the premium guy if they identify it, but just the edge class is just loaded on that front.
Okay, well, we're about to head out here. One quick from every single one of you. Dream pickup this offseason. You can get a guy this offseason that is you can't just pick somebody who's definitely not like, you can't say Joe Burrow, right? But somebody who is feasibly could be available. one dream guy, one dream pickup for this offseason. Who do you go with? Real quick, let's keep it under 15 seconds.
I'll just say Mason Graham is that guy for me.
Graham.
Look, I want to have the most dominant thing ever up front. I want to hurt the other team as much as possible. I want them to be terrified of the Browns when they walk on the field. Mason Graham is a tool to get you there.
All right.
Oh, I remember what it was. It's kind of outlandish. It's kind of out there, but man, if you could find a way to get T. Higgins over here, like somehow and make that work, I just think that would be entertaining.
All right. And I will go with Abdul Carter again. I know how good this Jim Schwartz defense can be when you have dominance on that defensive line. We saw it last year. And if you can get Mason Graham or Abdul Carter, I kind of have them kind of at the same place here, right? But if you get one of those two guys, you're going to give defenses a lot of trouble, right? Whether it be with the flexibility that you have of Abdul Carter, playing them off of things that you can also do with JOK. And then you also have Mason Graham, who will make JOK even better because then you can occupy space and then get downfield. You got Mike Hall, you got Myles Garrett. That's a nightmare for anybody, especially if you decide you're going to walk Myles up in the A-gap while both of those guys are sitting there on these guards' shoulders. So a lot of things you could do there, and a lot of just havoc you could create. And you figure out everything else in your second, third round. Like, you can still solve these problems with draft, free agency, everything else. You don't have to do it all in one round. But I want to appreciate you two for being able to be on this show. I want to appreciate everybody for being able to join us here for our conversation about how do we fix the Browns and what's necessary going forward.